Welcome, Colonel Lee. Welcome to my home. Make yourself comfortable there, Colonel. Allow me to get to the point, sir. I have been authorized by President Lincoln himself, with the full blessing of the War Department, to offer you full command of the Army with the rank of Major General. This army being raised to quell this rebellion and, of course, to preserve the Union.
I assume this army is to be used to invade those areas, to eliminate the rebellion by force.
Yes, sir. The federal government has been challenged by these rebels who have been most effective in changing the sentiments of various state legislatures, challenging our Constitution and challenging our central government. The attack on Fort Sumter cannot be ignored.
General, my home is right there across the Potomac, while you can see Arlington House from your front door. My family is spread all over this part of Virginia. If you invade the South, your enemy territory will be there, right across that river.
Well, sir, there is no great outcry for secession in Virginia. It's not a foregone conclusion that Virginia or Tennessee, Arkansas, or Kentucky will join the rebellion.
My friend, may I humbly submit that you're mistaken about Virginia. As you know, the legislature is convening in Richmond this very day to discuss the very issue of secession. Now, perhaps you know their mind better than they themselves. And I regret to say the president's hasty calling up of 75,000 volunteers to subdue the rebellion in the Cotton States has done nothing to ameliorate the crisis. It has only deepened it.
I trust you're not being too hasty yourself, Colonel. This is a great opportunity for you to serve your country.
My country, Mr. Blair. I never thought I'd live to see the day that the President of the United States would raise an army to invade his own country. No, Mr. Blair, I cannot lead it. I will not lead it.
I'm sorry to hear you say that, sir. I fear you're making a most dreadful mistake.
Sir, would you please convey my deepest sense of honor and gratitude to the President, but I must decline his offer. Please tell him, please be clear. I have never taken my duties lightly, but I have no greater duty than to my home, to Virginia. Thank you, sir.
President, I appreciate your sentiments, but we simply cannot afford to temporize. The North will strangle the South if we do.
Excuse me. I was told to join you.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. Gentlemen, Brigadier General Henri May, General Robert E. Lee, my military advisor, members of my cabinet. Our agents in the federal capital have shown us here how the North plans to crush us in the coils of a giant water snake.
That is precisely the situation, sir. All down the eastern seaboard to the Florida Keys, and then along the Gulf to New Orleans. Their Navy would seal off the Confederacy, and they will send their Western army south to secure the border states.
And cut the Confederacy in two.
Never. Never.
But it would be daring, Mr. President. They could slowly squeeze us to death by cutting off all our supplies and weapons from Texas and the ports of Mexico and Europe.
Scott, their general-in-chief and a Virginian, proposed this far-fetched strategy. The man is a traitor to the South.
To be a Southerner and believe in the Union does not make one a traitor, sir, or I would not be here.
I realize that you turned down Lincoln's offer to command the Yankee armies, General Lee, but I had no idea.
Mr. President, I believe secession is unconstitutional, and slavery is a moral and political evil in any society.
And why have you joined us?
Because I could not draw my sword against Virginia. My loyalty and my affections, and those of my family for 5 generations, belong to her. That is why I'm here, sir. Now, if we are to have any chance at all to defeat the North, we must enlist our own snake and strike like a cobra right at their vitals.
Did you know, General, that George Washington spent his boyhood not far from here? And it's just across that river down there that he was supposed to have thrown that silver dollar and cut down that cherry tree.
That may be so, Mr. Taylor, but it has an even greater significance for me. It's where I met my wife. And it's something these Yankees do not understand, will never understand. You see these rivers and valleys and streams, fields, even towns, they're just markings on a map to those people in the War Office in Washington. But to us, oh my goodness, they're birthplaces and burial grounds there. Battlefields where our ancestors fought, places where you and I, we learned to walk, to talk, and to pray. Places where we made friendships and, oh yes, fell in love. And they're the incarnation of all our memories, Mr. Taylor. And all that we are. All that we are. Gentlemen, these...
Well, he was a tragic figure in certain ways. I don't know that he necessarily viewed himself that way. He was interested in excellence, and he made a lot of decisions that we won't call bad decisions, but they had very unfortunate outcomes. And so I think that he was often a disappointed man. So just as a human being, he makes a series of decisions that later he either regrets or they simply don't come out the way that he wants them to. For instance, he decides to go to West Point. And for a long time, historians thought that his mother had thought that it was a way to get a free education. But what we know now from new material, he says, how I wish that I had taken my mother's advice and never joined the Army. And he says that just a year after he leaves West Point. And then every year after that, he thinks, maybe I should leave the Army. Maybe a ripe pear will fall into my lap from the private sector, and I can leave the Army and go be a civil engineer and so on. So he regrets it over a long period of time. And then at the end of his life, he says something that I do think is very tragic. Says to a friend of his, the great mistake of my life was to take a military education. Well, this in terms of Lee's life is to regret your whole life. And so I see him as a very disappointed man personally.
It's a warm spring Sunday at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Richmond. As the minister is about to present Holy Communion, a tall, well-dressed black man sitting in the section reserved for African Americans unexpectedly advances to the communion rail. Unexpectedly, because this has never happened here before.
And everyone paused. This was literally turning the heavens upside down for the Southerners. It was one thing for them to have lost the war. It was another thing for them to have had their country laid waste to. But for their very traditions to be turned upside down in their own homes or in their own churches, this was really too much.
The congregation freezes. Those who have been ready to go forward and kneel at the communion rail remain fixed in their pews. The minister stands in his place stunned and motionless. The black man slowly lowers his body, kneeling at the communion rail.
I mean, the war answered some things. It killed slavery. But what was left unanswered was, how is the United States going to work out a biracial society? We are still struggling with that.
After what seems an interminable amount of time, an older white man rises, his hair snowy white, head up, and eyes proud. He walks quietly up the aisle to the chancel rail.
And he was a man who had only recently said, I am penniless and I am homeless, and I have nothing left to live for. Yet this was also a man who many Southerners looked to for guidance and for wisdom as to what to do next.
So with silent dignity and self-possession, the white man kneels down to take communion along the same rail with the black man.
It's an important public gesture to show that it's all over parishioners, and this is part of the new world that we'll be living in.
And when Robert E. Lee knelt down next to this black man with a sort of mixture of hope and expectation, he was saying, this is what the future of the United States should be. This is what our legacy of April 1865 should be.
Lee has said he is rejoiced that slavery is dead. But this action indicates that those were not idle words meant to placate a Northern audience. Here among his people, he leads wordlessly through example. The other communicants slowly move forward to the altar with a mixture of reluctance and fear, hope and awkward expectation. In the end, America would defy the cruel chain of history besetting nations torn apart by civil war.